In order for us to build web applications that are backed by a database, there are a couple of fundamental questions that we need to have answers for. The first is, how do we interact with the database? And how do interactions with the database work? In order to understand the answers to these questions, we'll need to learn about the client-server model. Modern-day database systems, including PostgreSQL and most every other database system you're going to use, is going to follow a client-server model for how to interact with what we call a server. So the server is defined as a centralized system that communicates over some sort of communication network, which in our case is the internet, in order to serve many clients. You can think of the server literally kind of as your waiter at a restaurant. Your client could be your customers who are ordering from a menu, and your servers go to the back of a restaurant, do something that's obscured from the client, and comes back having fulfilled the client's request. That's the basic relationship between a server and a client. Servers and clients in a computer context are computer programs that are run on what we call a host. A host is simply a computer that's connected over the network and is either going to be hosting your server or your client. So in all client-server models, you have a client that sends a request to the server, very much like ordering from a menu from an actual server at a restaurant. The server's job is then to fulfill that request, no matter how it does that. The server then takes some time and sends back a response to the client. All of this is done using a common language for the server and the client to communicate with one another, and we call that language the communication protocol. This communication protocol is responsible for setting up the expectations and rules for how communication occurs between clients and servers. Relational database systems follow a client-server model for interacting with clients. In this course, our particular server is the database system Postgres. Postgres will be able to talk to multiple clients. Those clients can come in many forms. They could be command-line applications, they could be graphical user interfaces that you download to your computer, or in our case, they could be web applications that request certain things of our Postgres server and expect responses in order to fulfill user requests. You can also have multiple clients in multiple forms, all talking to the same server at once, using the same communication protocol that exists across the entire network. We're particularly interested in web application development, so let's talk a little bit about how database servers can serve another web server. It happens to be that web applications themselves follow a client-server model, as does our database. That means that a client to our database server could itself be a server to other clients. So in this case, we have a database server that treats our web server and our web application as a client to our database server. As we build a web application, we'll not only want to connect a web server to a database server, but we may also want to connect graphical user interfaces and command line tools to interact with our database as we're developing our web application. As a full-stack web developer, we'll need to manage the relationship between multiple web clients, which are served by a single web server, as well as potentially many web servers that are served by a single database server. So this is a typical diagram of what it looks like for us to build an entire web application. We have one or more clients, which are our users who are viewing our web pages from their computers. They're sending requests over to our web server, which is otherwise known as just server, confusingly, in the industry. And the server is responsible for fulfilling those requests to the web client. Sometimes to fulfill the requests from a client, the server actually needs to be served by something else, in which case it needs to be served by a database at times in order to ultimately fulfill the request of a web client. It's important to note that the host computer of the server and the database can sometimes be the same computer, or sometimes not be the same computer. And confusingly enough in the industry, the server sometimes refers to the physical computer that stores your web server or the process that serves the web application. It just depends on the context.